group of lights, and in the next 2 weeks, on August 31st, an amateur photographer had taken 5 photos of the lights. Also, on the 31st, 2 ladies had seen a large aluminum-colored, pear-shaped object hovering near a road north of Lubbock. The report went into the details of these sightings and enclosed a set of the photos that had been taken. This report in itself was a good UFO report, but the similarity to the Albuquerque sighting, both in the description of the object and the time that it was seen, was truly amazing. I almost overlooked the report from the radar station because it was fairly short. It said that early on the morning of August 26th, only a few hours after the Lubbock sighting, 2 different radars had shown a target traveling 900 miles per hour at 13,000 feet on a northwesterly heading. The target had been observed for 6 minutes, and an F-86 jet interceptor had been scrambled, but by the time the F-86 had climbed into the air, the target was gone. The last paragraph in the report was rather curt and to the point. It was apparently in anticipation of the comments the report would draw. It said that the target was not caused by weather. The officer in charge of the radar station and several members of his crew had been operating radar for 7 years, and they could recognize a weather target. This target was real. I quickly took out a map of the United States and drew in a course line between Lubbock and the radar station. A UFO flying between these 2 points would be on a northwesterly heading, and the times it was seen at the 2 places gave it a speed of roughly 900 miles per hour. This was by far the best combination of UFO reports I'd ever read, and I'd read every one in the Air Force's files. The first thing I did after reading the reports was to rush a set of the Lubbock photos to the intelligence officer of the 34th Air Division in Albuquerque. I asked him to show the photos to the AEC employee and his wife without telling them what they were. I requested an answer by wire. Later the next day, I received my answer. Observers immediately said that this is what they saw on the night of 25 August. Details by airmail. The details were a sketch the man and his wife had made of a wing around the photo of the Lubbock lights. The number of lights in the photo and the number of lights the 2 observers had seen on the wing didn't tally, but they explained this by saying that they could have been wrong in their estimate. The next day I flew to Lubbock to see if I could find an answer to all of these mysterious happenings. I arrived in Lubbock about 5:00 p.m. and contacted the intelligence officer at Reese Air Force Base. He knew that I was on my way and had already set up a meeting with the 4 professors. Right after dinner, we met them. If a group had been handpicked to observe a UFO, we couldn't have picked a more technically qualified group of people. They were Dr. W.I. Robinson, Professor of Geology, Dr. A.G. Oberg, Professor of Chemical Engineering, Professor W.L. Ducker, Head of the Petroleum Engineering Department, Dr. George, Professor of Physics. This is their story. On the evening of August 25th, the 4 men were sitting in Dr. Robinson's backyard. They were discussing micrometeorites and drinking tea. They jokingly stressed this point. At 9:20, a formation of light streaked across the sky directly over their heads. It all happened so fast that none of them had a chance to get a good look. One of the men mentioned that he had always admonished his students for not being more observant. Now he was in that spot. He and his colleagues realized they could remember only a few details of what they had seen. The lights were a weird bluish-green color, and they were in semicircular formation. they estimated that there were from 15 to 30 separate lights, and that they were moving from north to south. Their one wish at this time was that the lights would reappear. They did. About an hour later, the lights went over again. This time the professors were a little better prepared. With the initial shock worn off, they had time to get a better look. The details they had remembered from the first flight checked. There was one difference. In this flight, the lights were not in any orderly formation. They were just in a group. The professors reasoned that if the UFOs appeared twice, they might come back. Come back they did. The next night, and apparently many times later, as the professors made 12 more observations during the next few weeks. For these later sightings, they added 2 more people to their observing team. Being methodical, as college professors are, they made every attempt to get a good set of data. They measured the angle through which the objects traveled and timed them. The several flights they checked traveled through 90 degrees of sky in 3 seconds, or 30 degrees per second. The lights usually suddenly appeared 45 degrees above the northern horizon and abruptly went out 45 degrees above the southern horizon. They always traveled in this north to south direction. Outside of the first flight, in which the objects were in a roughly semicircular formation, in none of the rest of the lights did they note any regular pattern. 2 or 3 flights were often seen in one night. No success. First, they tried to compare the lights to the height of clouds, but the clouds were never near the lights, or vice versa. Next, they tried a more elaborate scheme. They measured off a baseline perpendicular to the object's usual flight path. Friends of the professors made up 2 teams. Each of the 2 teams was equipped with elevation measuring devices, and one team was stationed at each end of the baseline. The 2 teams were linked together by 2-way radios. If they sighted the objects, they would track and time them, thus getting the speed and altitude. Unfortunately, neither team ever saw the lights. But the lights never seemed to want to run the course. The wives of some of the watchers claimed to have seen them from their homes in the city. This later proved to be a clue. The professors were not the sole observers of the mysterious lights. For 2 weeks, hundreds of other people from miles around Lubbock reported that they saw the same lights. The professors checked many of these reports against the times of the flights they had seen and recorded, and many checked out close. They attempted to question these observers as to the length of time they had seen the lights and angles at which they had seen them, but the professors learned what I already knew. People are poor observers. Naturally, there has been much discussion among the professors and their friends as to the nature of the lights. A few simple mathematical calculations showed that if the lights were very high, they would be traveling very fast. The possibility that they were some natural phenomena was, of course, discussed and seriously considered. The professors did a lot of thinking and research and decided that if they were natural phenomena, they were something altogether new. Dr. George, who has since died, studied the phenomena of the night sky during his years as a professor at the University of Alaska, and he had never seen or heard of anything like this before. This was the professor's story. It was early in the morning when we returned to Reese Air Force Base. I sat up a few more hours unsuccessfully trying to figure out what they had seen. The next day, I again met the intelligence officer, and we went to talk to Carl Hart, Jr., the amateur photographer who had taken the pictures of the lights. Hart was a freshman at Texas Tech. His story was that on the night of August 31st, He was lying in his bed in an upstairs room of the Hart home. He, like everyone else in Lubbock, had heard about the lights, but he had never seen them. It was a warm night, and his bed was pushed over next to an open window. He was looking out at the clear night sky and had been in bed about a half hour when he saw a formation of the lights appear in the north, cross an open patch of sky, and disappear over his house. Knowing that the lights might reappear as they had done in the past, he grabbed his loaded Kodak 35, set the lens and shutter at f3.5 and 1/10 of a second, and went out into the middle of the backyard. Before long, his vigil was rewarded when the lights made a second pass. He got 2 pictures. A third formation went over a few minutes later, and he got 3 more pictures. The next morning, bright and early, Hart said he took the roll of unexposed film to a friend who ran a photo finishing shop. He explained that he did all of his film processing in this friend's lab. He told the friend about the pictures, and they quickly developed them. I stopped Hart at this point and asked why he didn't get more excited about what could be the biggest news photo of the century. He said that the lights had appeared to be so dim that he was sure he didn't have anything on the negative. Had he thought that he did have some good pictures, he would have awakened his friend to develop the negatives right away. When he developed the negatives and saw that they showed an image, his friend suggested that he call the newspaper. At first, the paper wasn't interested, but then they decided to run the photos. I later found out that they had done some checking of their own. We went with Hart into his backyard to reenact what had taken place. He described the lights as being the same dull, glowing, bluish-green color as those seen by the professors. The formation was different, however. The lights Hart saw were always flying in a perfect V. He traced the path from where they appeared over some trees in the north, through an open patch of sky over the backyard, to a point where they disappeared over the house. From the flight path he pointed out, the lights had crossed about 120 degrees of open sky in 4 seconds. This 30 degree per second angular velocity corresponded to the professor's measured angular velocity. We made arrangements to borrow Hart's negatives, thanked him for his information, and left. Armed with a list of names of other observers of the mysterious lights, the intelligence officer and I started out to try to get a cross-section account of the other UFO sightings in the Lubbock area. All the stories about the UFOs were the same. Various types of formations of dull bluish-green lights, generally moving north to south. A few people had variations. One lady saw a flying Venetian blind, and another a flying double boiler. One point of interest was that very few claimed to have seen the lights before reading the professor's story in the paper. But this could get back to the old question, do people look up if they have no reason to do so? We talked to observers in nearby towns. Their stories were the same. An airport reported that they had seen the lights on several occasions. It was in one of these outlying towns, La Mesa, that we talked to an old gentleman about 80 years